We are taught from childhood that the best path is a shared one. When two sides clash, we look for a blended middle ground, assuming the fair thing is always to split the difference. While this instinct is excellent for resolving social friction, applying it to questions of fact creates a blind spot. It assumes that the truth is a matter of negotiation rather than evidence. This error is known as the fallacy of the mean. It occurs when a person assumes a position is correct simply because it sits exactly halfway between two extremes. If we treat the truth as a mathematical average of two opinions, we lose the ability to see the world as it actually is. This fallacy breaks a basic rule of rational discussion called the acceptability criterion. This standard requires that any argument must be built on premises that a rational person would find reliable. The fallacy of the mean relies on an unwarranted assumption, the unstated premise that the middle position is inherently the right one. To see how often this assumption fails, we need to test it against 3 different layers of reality, from simple math to formal logic to the most complex human conflicts. Because a bad premise undermines everything built on top of it, the moderate conclusion is often the most logically indefensible. Consider a simple economic transaction. A seller lists a refrigerator for $300. A buyer offers $200. The immediate urge is to settle at $250. It feels balanced. It feels fair. But the center point ignores the underlying facts. If the refrigerator is only worth $180 on the open market, the fair compromise is actually a bad deal for the buyer. The price of $250 tells us nothing about the machine itself. It is a mathematical average of 2 arbitrary guesses. In economics, splitting the difference facilitates a deal, but it does not determine the actual value. Logic is even less forgiving than the market. Take the philosophical debate between determinism, the idea that every event is caused, and indeterminism, the idea that some things happen without cause. A student might feel that both views are too extreme and search for a moderate view that sits between them. But these concepts are direct contradictories. They are mutually exclusive. Either every event has a cause, or it is not the case that every event has a cause. There is no middle ground where an event is half determined. When dealing with binary realities, a moderate position is a structural impossibility. This brings us to the most difficult category, geopolitical conflict. When we see a situation like the Israeli-Palestinian crisis, the sheer scale of the suffering makes us desperate for a middle path. From the outside, it is easy to look at 2 opposing sides and conclude that a compromise must be the best solution because it seems to validate both perspectives equally. But we have to distinguish between a practical settlement and a just one. A compromise might be the only way to end the bloodshed and resolve a standoff, and in that sense, it is often a necessary tool for peace. However, the fact that a settlement stops the fighting does not mean the settlement itself is the most defensible moral position. One side may have a more legitimate claim than the other, regardless of where the final treaty line is drawn. If we assume a ceasefire is the same thing as a moral truth, we stop looking for what is actually right and settle for what is merely quiet. To navigate these discussions in your own life, you need to change how you evaluate middle ground proposals. When someone proposes a compromise as the correct view, insist that the position stand on its own independent merit. Ask for the evidence that supports that specific idea, regardless of its location on the spectrum between 2 extremes. If the arguer relies on the moderation of their view rather than facts, use an absurd counterexample to expose the flaw. Ask if the best way to behave in a voting booth is to divide your vote evenly among every political party on the ballot just to be moderate. They would never do that because they know some options don't deserve a share of the vote. They know that truth isn't distributed evenly across the ballot. Compromise is a vital tool for making peace between people, but it is a poor way to find the truth about the world.